Eala had just walked away from the biggest stage of her summer looking completely drained. The 7-match winning streak was gone. Belinda Bencic had stopped her in Toronto, winning 6-4, 6-0 and bringing an extraordinary run to an abrupt end. But strangely, the most important part of that night may not have been the score. It was what Alex said afterward. She wasn't talking about her next opponent. She wasn't talking about rankings. She wasn't even talking about revenge. She wanted a break. A day or two away from tennis. A haircut. Time with friends. Even something as simple as taking care of her nails. After nearly 2 relentless weeks of competition, it sounded like exactly what a 21-year-old athlete needed. But then something happened that changed the entire story. Alex left Toronto. And somehow, Toronto didn't leave Alex. A few days later, she arrived in Cincinnati, and the reception waiting for her looked nothing like what you would expect for a player coming off a 6-4, 6-0 defeat. The Filipino flags were back. The cheers were back. The excitement was back. Before Alex had even struck a single ball, the crowd was already reacting to her like a returning champion. And that is where the Cincinnati story truly begins. Because Eala was no longer arriving as the same player who had entered Toronto. Something had changed. Washington had already given her the first WTA singles title of her career. She had defeated Jessica Pegula in the final and become the first Filipino player to win a WTA singles title. Her ranking had climbed all the way to world number 20. And now Cincinnati offered another milestone. Alex was listed as the number 17 seed at the WTA 1000 event, the highest seeding of her career at that level. The tournament featured a 96-player draw, with the top 32 seeds receiving first-round byes. That meant Alex wasn't being forced immediately back into another brutal match after the exhaustion of Washington and Toronto. She had earned breathing room, but that breathing room came with something else. Expectation. Around her in Cincinnati were the biggest names in women's tennis. Aryna Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, Jessica Pegula, Coco Gauff, and an entire field filled with players who had spent years competing at the highest level. Only months earlier, Alex had been trying to prove she belonged among them. Now her name was sitting beside theirs on the draw sheet. But the ranking was only half the story. The more unusual development was happening outside the court, in the stands. Because Cincinnati was beginning to reveal something tennis doesn't see very often. Alex's audience travels. Washington created the first explosion. Toronto showed how large that explosion could become. And now Cincinnati was about to test whether it could happen again. In Toronto, Filipino supporters had transformed Alex's matches into something much bigger than ordinary tennis sessions. Flags filled the stand. Families came out. Crowds chanted. The atmosphere became part of the event itself. Tournament officials noticed. Broadcasters noticed. Her opponents noticed. And Alex noticed too. She had experienced what it felt like to play while thousands of people were emotionally invested in every point. Then came Cincinnati. A different city. A different tournament. A different week. Yet the same energy was beginning to appear. And that changes everything. A normal rising player can leave one tournament behind and start the next with a clean slate. Alex doesn't seem to have that luxury anymore. She leaves Toronto, but the audience doesn't necessarily stay there. It follows. And suddenly, the story is no longer just about whether Alex can win another tennis match. The bigger question is whether she is becoming an athlete capable of carrying an entire community's attention from one tournament to another. That is a completely different level of pressure. And it is also a completely different level of opportunity. Because Alex had already proven she could create momentum on court. She had proven she could defeat established stars. She had proven she could win a WTA title. She had proven she could climb into the world's top 20. Toronto then revealed another part of her rise. Her popularity was becoming powerful enough to change the atmosphere around her matches. Now Cincinnati was asking the next question. Could that popularity survive a loss? Could the crowd still be there after the winning streak disappeared? Could Alex walk into another tournament carrying the expectations created by the previous one? That question matters more than it might seem. Because winning when nobody expects you to win is one challenge. Winning when thousands of people expect you to win is another. And Alex was entering Cincinnati facing exactly that transition. She had the title. She had the ranking. She had the seeding. She had the first round bye. And she had an audience that had already demonstrated it was willing to follow her. The Toronto loss didn't erase any of those things. If anything, it made the next chapter more interesting. The streak ended. The momentum didn't. And that may be the most important distinction of all. The haircut was done. The short reset was over. The tennis was calling again. And Cincinnati was waiting. Washington had changed the conversation. Toronto had changed the scale. Cincinnati was where the two finally met. Alex arrived in Ohio carrying proof that her rise was no longer simply a promising story. She was now a WTA champion. The first Filipino woman to win a WTA singles title. A top 20 player. A WTA 1000 seed. And suddenly, The numbers were beginning to catch up with the attention. But here's the twist. The attention had actually arrived first. Toronto had already demonstrated what could happen when Alex's name appeared on the schedule. Thousands of fans packed the venue. Philippine flags transformed the stands. The atmosphere around her matches became impossible to ignore. And people inside the sport began talking about it. Her opponents acknowledged the support. Other players noticed the demographic she was bringing into tennis. The point wasn't simply that Alex had gained followers online. People were physically showing up. That distinction matters, because a social media audience can watch from anywhere. A real sports audience buys tickets. They travel. They fill seats. They make noise. They create an atmosphere that players can feel before the first serve. And that is what Alex was beginning to generate. Washington, Toronto, now Cincinnati. The supporters weren't waiting for Alex to become a major star before treating her like one. They were already behaving as if she was. And that creates a completely different proposition for tournament. They aren't simply booking Alex Eala anymore. They may be bringing in the audience that comes with Alex Eala. That is a powerful shift. For years, professional tennis followed a fairly familiar equation. Ranking creates visibility. Visibility creates promotion. Promotion creates an audience. But Alex's rise appears to be moving in another direction. Performance created attention. Attention created community. Community created demand. Demand increased opportunity. And then the ranking began catching up. She wasn't breaking the system. She was showing what can happen when the audience moves faster than the official numbers. But every rise comes with a price. Expectations. And this is where Cincinnati becomes much more than another tournament. Toronto created an enormous level of expectation. Now every entrance carries more attention. Every Filipino flag reminds Alex that people are watching. Every match becomes another test, not just of her tennis, but of how she handles becoming someone people specifically came to see. And she wasn't arriving fresh. She was coming off a 7-match winning streak, a WTA title, a deep run in Toronto, and an exhausting loss to Bensic. That is a heavy workload for any player. So Cincinnati wasn't simply asking whether Alex could attract another crowd. It was asking whether she could perform while carrying everything that had happened before. That is a completely different challenge. And there is another layer. The US Open was waiting immediately afterward. Cincinnati wasn't just another stop on the calendar. It was the final major tournament before New York. A strong performance could send Alex into the US Open with an entirely different level of confidence. Imagine the starting point. A WTA title. A world ranking inside the top 20. A WTA 1000 seeding. Major victories already behind her. And an audience that had demonstrated it would travel. That is not the profile of an unknown player anymore. That is the profile of someone entering a new stage of her career. But perhaps the most revealing moment happened away from the court. After Toronto, Alex didn't sound like someone desperate to immediately prove everyone wrong. She wanted normal life, a haircut, time with friends, a couple of days away, small things, ordinary things. And those details may actually tell us more about her next challenge than any ranking update. Because the next stage of Alex Eala's career isn't only about learning how to play better tennis. It's about learning how to live with everything that better tennis has created. The crowds, the expectations, the cameras, the ranking, the attention. The feeling that thousands of people are specifically watching you. Toronto showed what happens when that attention reaches another level. Cincinnati now asks whether Alex can carry it without allowing it to become a burden. And that is where the story becomes truly fascinating. She has already proven she can win when nobody expects her to. Now she has to learn how to perform when people do expect her to. Those are not the same challenge. The first requires belief. The second requires control. Washington created the breakthrough. Toronto revealed the phenomenon. Cincinnati is where the next version of Alex Eala has to emerge. And if she performs well here, the US Open suddenly becomes much more interesting. Because she wouldn't arrive in New York simply as a player who had enjoyed a good summer. She would arrive carrying everything she had built over these weeks. The title, the ranking, the confidence, the crowd, the expectations, and the knowledge that people were no longer watching simply to see what might happen. They were watching because Alex Eala had become someone who mattered. So now, the biggest question isn't whether this has been the hottest stretch of her career. It clearly has. The real question is whether this represents a permanent change, not just in Alex's ranking, not just in her results, but in how the tennis world sees her. Because streaks eventually end, rankings eventually move, every player eventually experiences a difficult tournament, crowds eventually go home. But what remains after the excitement fades? That is the test. And Cincinnati is the next place where we begin to find the answer. Alex doesn't need to prove that she can create a moment anymore. She has already done that. She doesn't need to prove that Filipino fans will support her. They already have. She doesn't need to prove that she belongs among elite players. Her ranking and results are beginning to say that for her. Now she has to prove something harder. That she can keep moving forward when the surprise is gone. When opponents know her. When expectations are higher. When the crowd expects more. When the next tournament isn't introducing Eala to the world, it's asking the world to watch what she does next. And that is why Cincinnati matters. Washington created the breakthrough. Toronto proved the audience. Cincinnati will test the player carrying both. The answer won't come from another ranking update. It won't come from another viral crowd video. It will come from the court, point by point, match by match, under the weight of everything Alex has built. And that is what makes this chapter so compelling. Because Eala is no longer walking into Cincinnati as the surprise. She's walking in as one of the players everyone is watching. And if the crowd follows her again, if the tennis rises with it, and if she can turn the pressure into confidence, then this summer may look very different in hindsight. It may not have been the moment Eala became famous. It may have been the moment the tennis world finally realized she had already arrived.